The diary was not meant to survive a security sweep. He had hidden it beneath a loose floor panel in his diplomatic quarters, wedged carefully between outdated star charts and a thermal sock with a hole in the heel. It wasn't treasonous. It wasn't classified. It was simply dangerous in a more humiliating way. He had written things, not about trade negotiations, not about the fragile ceasefire between Earth and the Aurelian Dominion, not even about the orbital defense grid that malfunctioned every third Tuesday. He had written about her. The palace of the Aurelian Queen hummed with a constant, almost musical vibration, an energy network woven through the walls like living circuitry. The light panels adjusted to emotional fluctuations, glowing softer in moments of tension, brighter during council debates. He still wasn't sure whether that was advanced technology or mild psychological warfare. This morning, the palace glowed uncomfortably bright. He was halfway through his diplomatic briefing when the door chimed. Not a polite chime, a precise one, the kind that implied someone important had pressed it. "Enter," he called, trying to sound like a man who had never hidden handwritten confessions beneath his floorboards. Two palace attendants stepped in. Their uniforms shimmered faintly with adaptive fabric, responding to micro-changes in temperature. They bowed with mechanical grace. "Ambassador," one said calmly, "a routine structural scan detected an anomaly in your chamber flooring." His stomach fell through several decks. "An anomaly," he repeated carefully. "Yes." He considered pretending to be surprised. Unfortunately, his face had never mastered diplomacy. "Define anomaly," he said weakly. The attendant extended a small object, his diary. The worn leather cover looked painfully mortal against the polished alien metal around them. "It appears to be a manually bound textual record," the attendant continued. "It has been delivered to Her Majesty for review, in accordance with security protocol." Of course it had. Naturally, the interstellar empire spanning 14 star systems had impeccable protocol regarding hidden floor literature. He stared at the diary as if it might spontaneously combust out of mercy. "Right," he managed. "Excellent, thoroughness is good." The attendants inclined their heads and departed, leaving him alone with the quiet hum of a palace that suddenly felt far too aware. Across the complex, in a chamber reserved for private contemplation rather than command, the Queen turned the diary over in her hands. She looked human in nearly every respect, dark hair cascading over one shoulder, steady breath, composed posture. Only her long, elegant ears distinguished her species, tapering slightly and angling subtly as if tuned to distant signals beyond sound. At that moment, they were tilted forward with unmistakable curiosity. She opened the diary. The first page she read made her pause. She doesn't realize how tired she looks after council meetings. Her eyes flicked to the chamber entrance, ensuring solitude. She continued. When she stands in front of the star map, issuing commands to fleets that could erase civilizations, she still brushes her hair behind her ear like she's nervous. One of her ears twitched reflexively. She turned another page. "I think the galaxy forgets she's alone in this." The Queen inhaled slowly. She had expected strategic analysis, perhaps criticism, perhaps human political commentary disguised as introspection. Instead, she found careful observations of her silences. Notes about the way her voice softened when addressing displaced refugees from a collapsed colony. A line about how she lingered in the observation gallery after everyone left, staring at the stars as if searching for something not listed in official charts. She closed the diary briefly. Her ears angled backward, not in anger but in something far more unfamiliar. Vulnerability. Meanwhile, in his quarters, he paced. There were many possible outcomes. Execution seemed unlikely. Diplomatic expulsion was probable. Public humiliation was almost guaranteed. He imagined the council chamber filled with alien admirals while excerpts were read aloud. "He wrote about my what?" she would say. He groaned aloud. A soft chime interrupted his spiraling imagination. "Her Majesty requests your presence," came the calm voice of the palace AI. Of course she did. He straightened his jacket, which suddenly felt like flimsy armor. As he walked the luminous corridors, alien guards nodded respectfully. None of them knew he had compared their sovereign's thoughtful frown to someone trying to solve the universe with kindness. He reached her private chamber doors. They opened without ceremony. She stood near the panoramic viewport, the curve of a distant nebula glowing behind her. The diary rested in her hand. He bowed, perhaps slightly too low. "You wish to see me, Your Majesty." She turned slowly. Up close, she looked as she always did, composed, radiant, almost entirely human. Only her long ears, angled thoughtfully toward him, betrayed that she could likely hear the frantic rhythm of his heart. "I have read your private record," she said evenly. He swallowed. "That was not its intended audience." "I gathered." A pause lingered. "You did not write about my policies," she continued. "No, Your Majesty." "What? You wrote about my solitude." He opened his mouth, closed it, considered lying, abandoned the idea. "Yes." Her gaze held his, not cold, not furious, searching. The hum of the palace softened, as if even its living circuitry were listening. "Why?" she asked quietly. He exhaled. "Because no one else does." The first time the alien queen laughed in the middle of a war council. 3 admirals nearly requested medical scans. It happened because of him. The chamber was a cathedral of hovering star maps and rotating tactical projections. Entire fleets shimmered in miniature above a circular table, their trajectories crossing like threads in a tapestry of potential destruction. He stood at the far end, technically present as an intercultural advisor, which was a polite way of saying he was the only human in a room that could conquer his planet before lunch. The Queen presided at the center. She looked, as always, almost entirely human, poised, composed, dark hair gathered at the nape of her neck. Only her long, elegant ears revealed her extraterrestrial origin, angling subtly as if tuned to the hum of every ship in orbit. When admirals spoke, her ears adjusted microscopically, parsing tone and electromagnetic fluctuations simultaneously. It was both impressive and slightly intimidating. An admiral concluded a report with the sort of grave tone usually reserved for apocalyptic outcomes. "If the Vierx coalition advances beyond the Hellion drift, escalation will be unavoidable." The chamber dimmed in response to the word escalation. All eyes turned to the Queen. She studied the holographic projection, fingers resting lightly against the table's surface. "Probability of full engagement?" she asked calmly. 72%, replied the tactical AI. He cleared his throat. It was not a dramatic throat clear. It was the sound of someone realizing far too late that he was about to interrupt a sovereign ruler discussing interstellar warfare. Every gaze shifted to him. He smiled the way one smiles when stepping onto thin ice. "Forgive me, I just have a small human observation." The Queen's ears angled toward him, curious. 72% is high, he continued carefully. "But on Earth, we've started entire holidays over lower odds." Silence. One admiral blinked slowly. He gestured awkwardly at the hologram. "I'm just suggesting that if everyone expects escalation, maybe doing the unexpected might, statistically speaking, be more disruptive." Another silence. Then the Queen did something unprecedented. She laughed. It wasn't loud. It wasn't undignified. It was simply genuine. A clear, warm sound that startled the chamber's acoustic sensors into recalibrating. Her ears tilted slightly backward in amusement. "Explain," she said, still composed but undeniably entertained. Encouraged by the fact that he was still alive, he stepped closer to the projection. "The coalition anticipates a defensive consolidation. If instead you initiate a public cultural envoy to Hellion Drift, broadcast it, make it impossible to interpret as covert movement, you shift the narrative." An admiral frowned. "That is strategically transparent." "Exactly," he said. "Transparency can be disarming. It forces them to decide whether they want to be the side that fires first during a peace ceremony." A ripple of consideration moved through the room. The Queen studied the star map again. Her long ears angled upward slightly, processing streams of tactical data flowing invisibly through the chamber. "Recalculate probabilities with diplomatic deployment," she instructed the AI. There was a brief pulse of light. Probability of full engagement reduced to 41%. Murmurs followed. He exhaled softly. "We humans are very good at being confusing." "That is evident," one admiral muttered. The Queen's gaze returned to him. There was something different in it now, not just curiosity, but recognition. "Proceed with envoy preparations," she commanded. "Incorporate human advisory protocol." The chamber brightened subtly, tension easing by degrees. As admirals dispersed to execute the new plan, he remained rooted to the floor, slightly stunned by his own survival. "You disrupted a 72% war," the Queen said quietly once they were alone. "I prefer to think of it as rearranging it." Her lips curved faintly. "You introduce variables my advisors do not. Chaos is our specialty." She stepped closer, the ambient light tracing gentle highlights along her features. Up close, she appeared entirely human, steady breath, focused eyes except for those ears, which now angled toward him with unmistakable attentiveness. "You were not afraid to speak," she observed. "Oh, I was terrified," he admitted. "I just disguised it as confidence. It's a cultural trick." Another soft laugh. The holographic star maps dimmed around them, leaving only a faint shimmer of distant systems. "Your species fascinates me," she said. "That's usually the first step before invasion," he replied. "We have already evaluated that option." He froze, a beat past, her expression remained serene. "You're joking," he said cautiously. Her ears twitched almost imperceptibly. "Yes," he placed a hand over his chest. "You're adapting human humor. That's either progress or a warning sign." "Possibly both." A gentle alert chimed, confirming the coalition had acknowledged the envoy with cautious acceptance. No weapons charged, no fleets advanced. He let out a long breath. "Well, that's one less galactic crisis before dinner." She regarded him thoughtfully. "You act as if this is ordinary." "It's not," he said. "But if I start treating it like destiny, I'll panic." Silence settled between them, softer now. "You altered more than strategy today," she said quietly. He tilted his head. "How so?" "You reminded this council that power does not require inevitability." He hesitated, then shrugged lightly. "On Earth, we've survived mostly by improvising." Her gaze lingered on him, a moment longer than protocol required. "Continue improvising," she said at last. He smiled faintly. "Try and stop me." As he left the chamber, the stars above the table shifted into new alignments. Less hostile, more uncertain. And uncertainty, he was beginning to realize, was sometimes the most powerful weapon of all. The scandal began with a whisper, not a dramatic broadcast, not a public accusation. Just a quiet leak from someone who had far too much time and access to palace archives. By the time he arrived at the central atrium, 3 advisors were pretending not to stare at him, and 2 military officers were staring very openly. He adjusted his collar and considered whether invisibility was an option. Humans could evolve quickly. The Queen stood at the far end of the chamber, conferring with her intelligence minister. She looked as she always did, composed, deliberate, nearly indistinguishable from a human woman save for her long, elegant ears that angled subtly as she listened to overlapping data streams fed directly into the palace grid. Those ears were tilted forward now, focused, which meant she already knew. He approached slowly, feeling the weight of 1,000 unspoken speculations pressing against his back. The intelligence minister bowed and withdrew. The chamber cleared with suspicious efficiency. "You have seen the network feeds," she said without turning. "Yes," he replied. "I was trending. I've never trended before. It's not as flattering as people think." A faint shift of her ear, amusement. Irritation, possibly both. "The leak originated within my own advisory circle," she continued. "Excerpts from your diary have circulated among several high-ranking officials." He winced. "Selective excerpts, I assume." "Yes." "Of course." She turned to face him fully. Her gaze was steady, but something beneath it flickered, an undercurrent of vulnerability carefully restrained. "They question your influence," she said. "They question my judgment." "That seems fair," he muttered. "My judgment is questionable at best." Her lips almost curved. "They imply emotional compromise," she added. He exhaled slowly. "Are you?" The question lingered between them, far more dangerous than any fleet maneuver. Her ears angled slightly backward, not defensive, thoughtful. "I do not make decisions based on sentiment," she said. "That wasn't what I asked." Silence stretched. Outside the transparent walls of the atrium, transport vessels glided silently between palace towers. The Empire functioned with mechanical precision, unaware, or pretending to be, of the subtle fracture forming within its leadership. "You are important to me," she said at last. He blinked. That was not the cautious, politically insulated phrasing he expected. "Important like a strategic advisor?" he asked lightly. "No." He swallowed. Footsteps echoed faintly in a distant corridor. Even here, privacy was never absolute. "If the Council believes I am weakened," she continued, "they may attempt to assert additional control." "So this isn't just gossip," he said. "It's a power test." "Yes." He rubbed a hand over his face. "All because I wrote that you drink tea alone after meetings." "You also wrote," she added evenly. "She carries the weight of 1,000 systems and still apologizes when someone else is late." He closed his eyes briefly. "That line was private." "It was accurate." A faint pulse ran through the atrium lighting, an alert from the palace AI. "Emergency council session requested," the AI announced calmly. He let out a slow breath. "Right on schedule." Minutes later, they stood before the High Council, 12 figures representing military, economic, and scientific sectors of the Dominion. Their expressions were carefully neutral. Their eyes were not. One counselor inclined her head. "Your Majesty, recent disclosures suggest potential bias in your diplomatic appointments." There it was, the Queen remained still. Her long ears angled forward, capturing every tonal nuance in the chamber. "My appointments are based on merit," she replied. Another counselor interjected. "The human advisor's private writings indicate emotional attachment." He resisted the urge to sink through the floor. "Yes," the Queen said calmly. The chamber shifted almost imperceptibly. "Yes," the first counselor repeated. She stepped forward. "He sees me as an individual, not solely as a sovereign," she continued. "That perspective has strengthened my understanding of our alliance with Earth." A murmur rippled through the council. "He has altered strategic outcomes in our favor," she added. "His council reduced the probability of armed conflict at Hellion Drift by 31%. Several counselors exchanged glances. "And if his regard for me includes personal sentiment," she said evenly, "that does not diminish his value. Nor does it impair my judgment." Her ears remained steady, no flicker of doubt. He stared at her, heart pounding so loudly he was certain the acoustic sensors were logging it as seismic activity. A senior military counselor leaned forward. "And if this sentiment compromises your authority?" She met his gaze without hesitation. "Authority that cannot withstand honesty is already compromised." Silence followed, heavy, evaluative. He realized then that this was not merely about him. It was about whether an empire built on precision could tolerate vulnerability at its center. Finally, the first counselor inclined her head. "The council will observe outcomes," she said. "For now, no further action." Translation: "You are being watched." The session dissolved. Back in the atrium, he exhaled so dramatically that a passing attendant glanced at him in concern. "You defended me," he said quietly. "I defended my decision," she corrected. He tilted his head. "And—" Her gaze softened only slightly. "And you." For a moment the palace hum felt less oppressive. "You realize," he said, "that if this gets worse I may need to flee dramatically." She raised an eyebrow. "I am not built for dramatic fleeing," he clarified. "I trip over ceremonial carpets." A faint, reluctant laugh escaped her. Tension eased, not gone, but tempered. "They will test us," she said softly. "Let them," he replied. "I'm very stubborn." "I have noticed." They stood side by side, watching distant ships trace silver arcs across the sky. Scandal had not shattered the empire. It had simply forced it to confront something unfamiliar. Honesty, and for the first time since the leak, her ears angled not toward the council chambers, but toward him. The vote was not announced with fanfare. Empires rarely clap when deciding whether to implode. He stood beside her in the central chamber while 12 counselors glowed faintly behind their translucent podiums. The palace AI dimmed the lights to a diplomatic shade of historic moment. He hated that shade. "For the record," he whispered, "if they exile me, I'd like a planet with breathable air and decent coffee." "You do not drink coffee," she murmured. "I'd start. Exile changes a person." Her ears flicked forward, betraying the small smile she refused to show. The High Council's lead counselor rose. "After review of strategic outcomes, economic indicators, and diplomatic stability, we have concluded that the human advisor's continued presence benefits the Dominion." He blinked. "That is bureaucratic, for you may stay," the counselor clarified. Relief rushed through him so fast his knees nearly filed a formal complaint. A military representative added, "However, public confidence must be restored. A demonstration of unity is required." He leaned toward her. "Please tell me that does not involve ceremonial dueling." "It does not," she said calmly. "Probably." The demonstration turned out to be a joint address broadcast across 3,000 inhabited systems. No pressure. They stood on the grand balcony overlooking the capital's spires. Anti-gravity drones hovered discreetly, projecting their image into orbiting relays. Millions, no billions, were watching. He had once been nervous ordering food in a foreign restaurant. Now he was about to speak to half a galaxy. She stepped forward first. "My people," she began, her voice amplified not by volume but by resonance technology woven into the architecture itself. Strength is not the absence of feeling. It is the discipline to act wisely despite it. Her ears angled steadily toward the horizon, transmitting micro-expressions into the broadcast, so even distant citizens could read her sincerity. I chose my advisor for his insight, she continued. I keep him for his integrity. That was his cue. He swallowed. Hello, he said to the galaxy. I promise I didn't plan any coups. I can barely plan my mornings. A ripple of restrained amusement pulsed through the crowd below. I wrote private thoughts, he continued, steadier now. Some of them sentimental, all of them honest. If caring about the person who leads you is a weakness, then I suggest we redefine weakness. He glanced at her. When I arrived here, I thought diplomacy was about strategy. It turns out it's about trust, and trust requires seeing each other as people, not titles. Silence held, but it was no longer tense. It was reflective. The economic minister later admitted that approval metrics spiked during that line. After the address, the council ratified a new transparency protocol. Personal advisors would no longer be shadowed by suspicion alone, but evaluated by measurable impact. It was subtle reform, but reform nonetheless. The intelligence minister who had leaked the diary excerpts resigned quietly. No dramatic trial, just a transfer to a research station studying asteroid algae. He sent them a polite note wishing the algae well. Weeks passed, trade routes stabilized. Political factions lost momentum without scandal to feed on. The Dominion did not collapse. Instead, it adapted. One evening, long after the crisis had faded into analysis reports, he found her alone in the atrium again. You are smiling at nothing, she observed. I was remembering the look on the military counselor's face when I joked about coups. Her ears tilted. He has requested a copy of your speeches for leadership training. You're kidding. I am not. He laughed softly, then grew thoughtful. When I first came here, he said, I was trying to prove humans deserved a seat at the table. And now, she asked, now I'm trying to deserve the seat myself. She studied him not as sovereign to subordinate, but as one being measuring another's growth. You have changed, she said. I trip less over ceremonial carpets. That is not what I meant. He met her gaze, I know. He had learned restraint, learned patience, learned that courage was sometimes quieter than defiance. She stepped closer, close enough that the palace censors respectfully dimmed their focus. The council no longer questions your influence, she said softly. Should I be worried? They now question how to replicate it. He winced playfully. Please don't replicate me. One of me is statistically dangerous. A faint laugh escaped her again, freer now, unguarded. Beyond the transparent walls, ships traced calm arcs through starlit skies. Not warships, not emergency fleets, just life continuing. You once wrote, she said, that I apologize when others are late. I did. You were wrong. He raised an eyebrow. I no longer apologize for carrying what is mine to carry, she said. He felt that settle inside him, a quiet victory greater than any council vote. And I no longer write about you as untouchable, he replied. You're formidable, yes, but not alone. Her ears angled toward him, not scanning, not analyzing, simply present. The empire had not fallen. The scandal had not destroyed them. It had forced them to stand publicly in something far riskier than power. Truth. Stay, she said, not as a command. As long as you'll have me, he answered. Above them the stars shimmered against the vastness of space. Not cold, not distant, just waiting.